Welcome to Book Talk. I once again return to thriller written by none other than Agatha Christie. And the name of this particular murder mystery is And Then They Were None. I'm sure you must have heard about this particular book. And it was earlier published as 10 Little Indians. And Hindi movie Gumnaam was an adaptation of this particular book. So it's a very interesting book. I needn't talk about it now. As I go through my program, you'll come to know how interesting is the story. I have read this book for the third time, and believe me, each time you get a feel as if you are reading it for the first time. So that itself is a big tribute to a particular book. It is a master suspense and a masterpiece, and the most difficult of her books to write. As she confesses, this particular book was the most difficult for her to write. That is, I mean Agatha Christie, the lady author. The narration of this book is so precise that you tend to forget after you finish the book. As I was telling you earlier, that once you read this book, you get a feel that you've read the book completely, but you'll soon forget the content of this book because it is so intricate and so complex that you will feel like reading again and again. So that indeed is a very typical thing about this particular book. And it has sold about 100 million copies. It is also the world's best-selling mystery novels and one of the best-selling books of all times. The central idea of this book is extremely interesting, and the novel starts with a bunch of people being lured into coming to an island under various pretexts, such as finding a job or employment, you could say, or a late summer holiday, or even to meet old friends. And mind you, all have been complicit in the deaths of some other human beings. So all have committed crimes, and after committing crime, they have not got real justice, and they all are roaming free. And the person who has invited them to this place, perhaps want to set the record straight. There are about 8 guests and 2 servants who are present there, and all are charged with some crime or the other. And when they come, their crime is told to them on a gramophone, and on a gramophone recording after dinner on the very first night, and informed that they have been brought to this particular island to pay for their sins. They are the only people in the island and cannot escape due to the distance from the mainland and the inclement weather. And gradually all 10 are killed, one after the other, each in a manner that seems to match a particular nursery rhyme. Nobody else seems to be left alive on the island by the time the last apparent death takes place. So after that, nobody is alive. A confession in the form of postscript to the novel unveils later how the killings took place and who was responsible. There are 10 characters in this particular novel. I'll give you the names of these characters because then you'll be able to relate how each character is murdered. Thomas, Ethel Rogers, Anthony Marston, Philip Lombard, Miss Brent, Mrs. Rogers, General MacArthur, Vera Claythorne, Justice Wargrave, and lore. Now let me take you through the storyline of this particular very interesting title. It is on a hot summer day, sometime in early August, in the late 1930s. 8 people arrive on a small isolated island of the Devon coast of England, and each appears to have received a kind of an invitation which I have already told you. Now these people are received by the butler and the housekeeper, and their names respectively are Thomas and Ethel Rogers. So these two people, they receive all these 8 guests, and the host, the name of the host of these 8 guests are Ulick Norman Owen and his wife, Mrs. Una Nancy Owen. Now, this is the couple that has invited all these 8 guests, and the butler and the housekeeping person, they receive him and they inform him that the hosts have not arrived and in person, but they have given us instructions to look after you. And this actually is not welcomed by the guests. They don't like this strange behavior of their hosts. Nevertheless, these 8 people, they go inside the house, where they find that there is a framed copy of a nursery rhyme, which is 10 little niggers, hangs in every room of the guest. So there are 8 rooms. This little nursery rhyme, 10 little niggers, hangs in each particular room. And then they also notice that there are 10 figurines which sit on the dining room table, and after supper, when they are having the supper, after that there is a gramophone recording, and that gramophone recording describes each visitor turnwise, and accuses each visitor of the crime that he or she has committed. In fact, they had all committed murder, but and had escaped justice. And then it asks all the accused that if anyone has a defense for themselves, if they want to defend their case, they can talk about it. But all but Anthony Marston and Philip Lombard deny the charges, and Miss Brent refuses to even discuss the particular case, her case, with anybody else. Suddenly they all realize that they don't even know each other, and conclude that this name of the host, U.N. Owen, is actually a short form of is a shorthand of unknown. And in the aftermath of the recording, after the supper, they are having this recording, and after that they sit down for a drink or something, where they find after a little while that Marston is one of the guests. He finishes his drink, but suddenly he collapses, and what they find out is that he has been killed because of cyanide poisoning. The remaining guests then, they noticed that all of a sudden, out of the 10 figurine, 1 figurine is now broken, and the nursery rhyme, which is there in every room, appears to reflect the manner of the death. It says, one choked his little self, and then there were 9. So one choked his little self, and then there were 9. So after this, there is chaos there, and but next morning when they all assemble, uh, they find Mrs. Rogers. Now Mrs. Rogers is one of the characters. Uh, Her corpse is found somewhere there. It's found on a bed, and she had died in her sleep from an overdose of chloral hydrate. That is the poison she had, and she has died because of that particular poison. And by lunchtime, General MacArthur is also put to death, and he is hit by something very, very solid, on account of which he collapses and he dies. So after this, they noticed that two more figurines that were there in the dining hall have been broken. And again, these deaths, they parallel the nursery rhyme, in the sense that the nursery rhymes describe these particular deaths. And meanwhile, Miss Brent, who had refused to even speak about a crime, now thinks of discussing her case in a private manner with Vera Claythorne. So she finally thinks that there is no point in keeping quiet about this particular about a crime. So she opens her heart to the other person, the other lady there. Her name is Vera Claythorne. A search for Mr. Owen, the host, starts. These people are very nervous now. They start looking for Mr. Owen, but they don't find him anywhere, and there is nobody else in the island except the remaining 7. So out of 10, 3 are killed, 7 are there. The island is a bare rock where nobody can just come and hide and start killing and then go off. He will surely be noticed. So all of them are very uncomfortable, and they conclude that any one out of the 7 can be a killer now. So Wargrave now decides to lead the group in determining that as to who is the murderer, and none of them can be definitely ruled out. So everybody has started suspecting the other person. Next morning, Rogers, is found murdered, and he had gone to the woods to chop for chopping wood, and someone goes and kills him there. After breakfast, Miss Brent is found dead in the kitchen. She had gone to the kitchen because she was not feeling well, and where somebody injected her potassium cyanide with a hypodermic needle. So now Rogers is dead, and Miss Brent is also dead. Wargrave then suggests searching of all the rooms and locking it up for any potential danger. Suddenly, they discover that Lombard's gun has gone missing, and when she goes up to her room and she goes to a bathroom for a bath, she is shocked by the smell of seaweeds, and screams, which is hanging from the roof of her toilet, and she screams, and when she screams, everyone rushes up to see what has happened with her. And in the meanwhile, Wargrave doesn't go. He is sitting there, and suddenly people notice that he is immobile, and he is crudely dressed up in a lawyer's attire, and he is not moving. Suddenly he is briefly examined by Dr. Armstrong, who pronounces him dead, and from a gunshot on his forehead. So now, with this, even Wargrave is no more. And that night, Lombard appears surprised when he finds that gun which he had lost is suddenly back in his room. So somebody had taken it, and he has come and kept it back very quietly. So now that this means there is definitely a killer out of the people who are alive. and Lore catches a glimpse of someone leaving the house, but loses track of that person, and he just cannot follow that person. He then discovers that even Armstrong is absent from his room, and the remaining three guests conclude that Armstrong must be probably is the killer. So now what the three survivors apart from Armstrong are Vera, Lore and Lombard. They decide to stay together at all times, so that they are together and nobody can just come and kill one particular person in isolation. In the morning, they unsuccessfully attempt to signal to the mainland. Now they are also getting very nervous and they're getting frustrated and they want to move out of the place. So they go to the sun and they carry a mirror, and with the reflection of the sun they want to signal to the mainland that they are in distress. It's an SOS, but they fail in that and nobody notices it, and they come back. Meanwhile, Lore is hungry and he goes to the house to have some food, and rest of the two are not hungry, so they don't go. And when he comes to the house, he is suddenly crushed by a clock statue that falls from the top very close to Vera's room, and it crushes his skull. And meanwhile, Vera and Lombard are now confident that Armstrong is the killer, because Armstrong goes missing. So they think that Armstrong is the guy who has killed everybody, and now we three are there. The two of us are here, and Lore has gone inside to have food. But soon they discover a washed up body on the beach, which is very decomposed, but it looks like the body of Armstrong. And then Vera suggests to Lombard that why not we pull out the body and take it inside the house. But that is only a pretext, because when they are doing that, Vera pulls out the gun that is there in the holster of Lombard, and when she pulls out the gun, Lombard tries to jump on her to take the gun, to retrieve the gun, but he is unable to do that. In the meanwhile, Vera shoots Lombard and he dies on the spot. And soon Vera returns to the house. Vera, in a shaken state, is relieved to reach the house, where she finds a noose and a chair arranged in her room. Now she is almost getting trapped into that hallucination, one could say. And a strong smell of sea is there present in the room, with visions of her former lover, Hugo, urging her in a post-traumatic state to climb onto the chair. And then she does climb onto the chair, and she adjusts the noose around her neck and kicks the chair and hangs herself. So that ends the story of Vera, and that in a way completes the story, the main action points of the book. And now there are two Scotland officials who are quite puzzled about this person, UN Owen, the host. And whereas they are quite clear about the death from Marston to Wargrave, with the help of the victims' diaries and a coroner's careful report, but they are unable to make out who this UN Owen was, and they surmise that probably he was one of the guys out of the 10 who was on a killing spree, but they are not able to figure out as to who that person was. When Vera died, when she pushed the chair, somebody definitely came and put the chair back to that upright position, and that was a bigger indication for the Scotland Yard people that somebody after Vera's death also was roaming around in that particular island, and presumably presumably he was the killer. In a postscript later on, once a fishing trawler picks up a bottle inside its trawling net, and inside the bottle there is a written confession, and that explains who was the killer and how all these crimes were committed. But it is not very clear as to after how many years or how long this particular confession bottle was retrieved from the sea. In that note, Justice Wargrave, he gives his he writes down and confesses that all his life he wanted to make a solvable puzzle of murder, in the sense that that murder nobody could solve. That kind of a murder mystery he wanted to make, and but he did not have the right people whom he could have utilized for this particular unsolvable crime. And so he was looking for people who had already committed some murders, or they were into crimes and who were guilty, and whom he could have utilized for this particular crime. And then he also explains that the gullible Armstrong, how he used him into helping him fake his own death. And he told Armstrong that if he's declared dead in the group, he would be able to go around quietly and find out who the actual murderer is. And then he also writes that when Vera died, he came and neatly put the chair back in the same position where it was originally, and he also explains how he used his own gun, and with some elastic material he was able to pull the trigger onto himself and kill himself. And in the missive he also writes that why he's confessing, because a pitiful man needs some recognition, and that is why he's writing his confession. He also describes the first chronological victim of this entire chain was one Isaac Morris. He was a sleazy drug trafficker, and he was made to buy this island, and he was a person in an anonymous manner, and he was indeed the person who had invited all these 10 people, rather 8 people and 2 servants to this island. And but Wargrave also says in that he was poisoned before he left for the island. And Wargrave's intention was, when the police comes in, they should have the full count of the murders that had taken place, and with evidence that someone had been alive after each murder, and he was successful in doing that. And he also goes on to say that there were 3 clues by virtue of which the police could have solved this particular puzzle, but then he was very sure that the police does not have that wherewithal or the capability or the skill to have solved this particular problem unless they retrieved his confession, and that was this particular bottle which was found in the trawler. So that ends the story, and I hope you liked this particular program, and if you've liked our program, kindly share it, kindly subscribe our channel, and soon we'll be coming out with another book for you. Till then, goodbye from Book Talk.